Well, I made several videos about operative systems or operating systems, you guys actually correct me on that, the past couple of months. Starting with Windows vs Linux on older AMD GPUs, then Windows vs Linux on top tier cards like the 7900 XTX and the 4080 Super, and even videos like Windows 10 vs Windows 11 or Windows 11 vs Nano 11. And I even made one a couple of weeks ago testing new cards like the RX 9070 XT and the RTX 5080. But as usual I tested Nobara 42 and it is a Fedora based distro, and when I test Nobara you guys always tell me some things like, well, you should test CachyOS because CachyOS is much faster in gaming, or you should test Bazzite because Bazzite is much faster in gaming. So with that in mind, I am today testing Windows 11 versus Nobara 42 versus CachyOS versus Bazzite 42 with the RX 9070 XT and the RTX 5080. And the process here was a clean installation for every single system with their out-of-the-box performance. And there are some things that I like more about CachyOS, others that I like more on Bazzite, but I still think that Nobara is the best system that you can use if you're jumping into Linux right now. It is easy to use, has a driver manager, app store, and so on, so on, so on. But we'll talk more about the things that I liked and disliked about each distro in the end, of course, in the final thoughts. And well, to make Linux work like this, all I had to do was install it, which is as simple as installing Windows nowadays, or even easier, with Bazzite being a little more user-friendly, I guess. Enter my Steam account, set the compatibility mode on Steam, which automatically downloads some Proton versions. Proton is kind of a translation layer from Valve. And then download the latest version of Proton GE from Proton Plus app that comes pre-installed with Nobara and Bazzite. As for CachyOS, it is just using the native Proton CachyOS. And if you want to play games outside of Steam, it's also easy. You have a software called Lutris that usually comes pre-installed, that allows you to play games from GOG or GOG, Epic Store, Ubisoft Connect and EA App, and you also have other alternatives like Heroic Launcher, which I personally use even on Windows, that allows you to play all games from GOG or again, GOG, whatever, Epic Store and Amazon Prime. And of course it is also more user-friendly. Like today's sponsor. Today's video sponsor is GVG Mall, bringing you lots of software deals like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2019 or 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and for all of these you can use my SKG discount code for 30% off, getting a Windows 11 serial key for $22 and a Windows 10 one for only $15. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. So again, download the CachyOS or Bazzite or Nobara wherever ISO, install the system, enter in your Steam account because Steam comes pre-installed, download Proton, set the compatibility mode on Steam, and then maybe download the Heroic Launcher for some games outside of Steam, and you're good to go. I mean, it's really easy. And as I always say in these videos, people that used Linux like 10 years ago might find this odd, but Linux nowadays is really easy to use. And a good example are the drivers. As soon as you pick a Linux build for either AMD or NVIDIA, you don't really need to care about drivers anymore. As soon as you do a system update, drivers will be automatically updated alongside any other outdated software, kernel patch, etc. that you have there. So it's really easy. And now that you finally know how things work, let's go to the benchmarks. Starting with The Witcher 3 at 1080p, we are most likely getting bottlenecked by my Ryzen 7 9700X with both GPUs, even though we're using 6200 megatransfers per second CL32 RAM and FCLK at 2167 MHz, and I have tested and retested these results, and it seems that Nobara and Bazzite just deliver better FPS with the 9070 XT, being faster than CachyOS and Windows, while CachyOS is the fastest one when it comes to the 5080. As we move to 1440p ultra-wide, we have all Linux versions delivering lower FPS than Windows with a 9070 as expected, and with Nobara and Bazzite working terribly with the 5080, something that I tested more than once as well, with CachyOS, to my surprise, delivering very good results here. Although as we enable ray tracing, at 1080p both cards perform worse with Linux, with Bazzite delivering quite lower performance than Nobara and CachyOS even when using the same Proton version. Something that didn't happen with a 5080 that performed quite well on Linux at this resolution. And it continues to perform well at 1440p ultra-wide, where CachyOS is the best performer, followed by Nobara and Bazzite that only had a bit lower averages, but much lower 1% lows. As for Counter-Strike 2, it runs natively on Linux with Vulkan, and at 1080p we have Linux performing quite well with both cards, with the 5080 delivering virtually the same FPS on both systems. Something interesting to see, I would say. Although, as we move to 1440p ultra-wide, Windows takes the lead, being 17% faster on the 9070 XT and 12% faster on the 5080. Plague Tale Requiem is a game that runs exceptionally well on Linux, not only on AMD, but also with NVIDIA cards, with CachyOS being the fastest OS that I tested in this game. 8% faster than Windows on the 9070 XT and 5% faster than Windows on the 5080. 5080 that has some performance issues in this title when running Nobara and Bazzite. In this case, kind of stutters, lots of them. At 1440p ultra-wide, all Linux versions are delivering around the same performance on the 9070 XT, with Bazzite now delivering the best 1% lows, and with the 5080 performing again quite better with CachyOS, with Nobara now performing well, but with Bazzite still having a stuttery gameplay. Cyberpunk 2077 is also running quite well at 1080p, but this time only with the 9070 XT, with Nobara and CachyOS now being faster than Windows, with only Bazzite being a bit slower. Sadly, we can't really say the same for the 5080 that performs at least 21% better on Windows. At 1440p ultra-wide, things change a bit, and Linux now loses some ground with the 9070 XT, with Windows delivering higher averages but lower 1% lows. But the biggest difference is definitely with the 5080, where Windows is at least 27% faster, and that's a big difference. And remember that Bazzite had slightly lower FPS? Well, with ray tracing it is even worse with the 9070 XT, where Nobara and CachyOS are 28% faster. In this case, if you happen to choose Bazzite and wanted to use ray tracing with the 9070 XT, Windows would be 61% faster, and that's a huge difference. To my surprise, the 5080 delivers decent results here, much better than I was expecting, and at 1440p ultra-wide, it is more of the same, with Windows being at least 27% faster than Linux on the 9070 XT, and at least 18% faster than Linux with the 5080. But moving to Unreal Engine 5 with Robocop Rogue City, we have the opposite results, where the 9070 XT performs exactly the same on both Windows and Linux, while the 5080 delivers not only lower averages, but much lower 1% lows. And I can confirm that the game stutters and stuttered a lot with the 5080 on Linux. At 1440p ultra-wide, the stuttering gets decreased for sure, but it is still there, with the 9070 XT delivering exceptional Linux results, while the 5080 is only able to deliver 77% of its Windows performance, and with CachyOS. Banishers Ghost of New Eden is another Unreal Engine 5 title, but unlike Robocop, it runs exceptionally well with Linux, with the 9070 XT being 23% faster with CachyOS, this in a CPU bottlenecked scenario. And I must say that it is also impressive to see the 5080 results, because 6 months ago I tested the 4080 Super in this same scenario and it was considerably faster on Windows. It means that NVIDIA Linux drivers are indeed improving. And that shows even at 1440p ultra-wide, where even though the 5080 delivers slightly lower averages, both cards deliver a smoother experience on Linux. Great results here. Although as we move away from the standard game engines with Ghost of Tsushima, things get way harder for the 5080 that at 1080p performs 51% better on Windows, which again is a massive performance gap. The 9070 XT on the other hand performs slightly worse with all Linux versions, but not by much, actually closing the gap with Windows as we go into 1440p ultra-wide, which is the opposite of what we see in most titles, where the higher the resolution, the more Linux loses ground. As for the 5080, it still runs 32% better on Windows, which is kind of a bummer. And the same happens with The Last of Us Part 2. At 1080p it runs decently well on the 9070 XT, but Windows is still 14% faster, The 5080 on the other hand gets its performance demolished when switching to any Linux version, although it seems that Bazzite works better in this game, and that shows at 1440p ultra-wide, where Bazzite is 5% faster than Windows on the 9070 XT and much faster than the other versions of Linux with the 5080, in this case by 17%. And before you ask, yes, I reinstalled Bazzite, retested this game, and the results were exactly the same. It is odd, but it is what it is. With Spider-Man 2, we have another good performance for Linux with the 9070 XT, with CachyOS getting really close to Windows performance. The 5080 though, well, isn't performing that great. The results aren't as bad as, let's say, Ghost of Tsushima, but they aren't good either. What I wasn't expecting was that at 1440p ultra-wide, the 9070 XT would perform better on Linux, with CachyOS being in the lead by 11%, but with Bazzite delivering the best 1% lows. Again, very interesting results, I would say. Starfield was a mess when it came out, and it was an even bigger mess with NVIDIA cards, and even though they fixed it on Windows, Linux still performs like crap in this game, especially if you are using a 5080. But if you're using a 9070 XT, you're fine, having virtually the same FPS you have on Windows at 1080p. At 1440p ultra-wide, even the 9070 XT gets a little less performance on Linux, but only by a little I would say, while the 5080 delivers a complete slideshow, being at least 71% faster on Windows. As for Doom the Dark Ages, while it runs with Vulkan, it also uses Proton, and I believe that should be because of path tracing, but correct me if I'm wrong. For the first time, the 5080 has a smaller performance decrease when running Linux than the 9070 XT. And all versions perform around the same, I would say, with Windows being at least 15% faster than Linux. And that doesn't really change at 1440p ultra-wide, where impressively the 5080 delivers around the same performance with CachyOS as it does with Windows, which again is really awesome to see. With Oblivion Remake using Unreal Engine 5, while the 9070 XT delivers around the same performance with all OSs, the 5080 has another low performance crisis. And at 1440p ultra-wide the difference decreases to 30%, not that it really matters, with the 9070 XT delivering the same FPS on Windows and Linux. Let's hope that the newer drivers can fix Nvidia's performance here. Now, Silent Hill 2 was a very interesting test. The 5080 still performs quite slower when it comes to Linux, but besides Bazzite, the 1% lows are fairly equal in both Linux versions. On the 9070 XT though, Windows and Nobara have a way smoother gameplay that is easily to see when testing, while CachyOS and Bazzite deliver a very stuttery experience. I don't really know why, but it just happens. And it is only when moving to 1440p ultra-wide that we have a more stable experience, as our average FPS are also lower. But strangely, Bazzite delivered the lowest 1% lows with both the 9070 XT and the 5080. As for the alters, we have only results for 1080p, as the game would constantly crash on Linux while trying to run it at 1440p ultra-wide. Don't really ask me why, it just did. As for the results, the 5080 was again considerably faster on Windows, in this case by at least 28%, and as for the Linux results only, distro versus distro, Nobara 42 was the fastest OS for this game, with both the 5080 and the 9070 XT. With the 9070 XT delivering decently good results, I would say, and with Nobara 42 delivering better 1% lows than even Windows. And it seems that when the games don't feature Unreal Engine 5 latest versions, or any other proprietary Sony engine, they run very well with NVIDIA cards on Linux, like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 that uses Crytek engine, working exceptionally well on Linux with the 9070 XT and the 5080. And that still applies to 1440p ultra-wide, where the 5080 has slightly lower performance on Linux, really small difference, and the 9070 XT exactly the same one. And reaching the final line, we have the average FPS numbers of Windows versus THREE LINUX distros. At 1080p we can see that CachyOS and Nobara are on par, still delivering 96.5% of Windows performance, which shows that things are improving on both sides. But this is at a low resolution, and when going to a higher one, we have the 5080 getting a bit more ground with CachyOS, but we also have the 9070 XT losing some ground when compared to Windows. But well, considering both these cards were released around half a year ago, yeah, the Linux drivers are already great, and believe me, they will only get better. As you saw, you know that people like to fight a lot about Linux distros and so on, but the results just show the truth. There are some cases with CachyOS being faster, there are some others where Bazzite is faster, and there are some others where Nobara is faster, and on a general picture, they're all about the same. In some games, again, one runs faster than other and so on, but generally, they're the same. But there are of course some small variances in terms of performance depending on the game, but especially, or the main thing, is the small differences in between each distro, some that you might like, some that you might not like. CachyOS, for example, it is a distro based on Arch Linux that is mainly gaming focused and brings several optimizations for Ryzen CPUs, especially Zen 4 and Zen 5. Those optimizations are one of the things that I like about CachyOS, of course, and the fact that it also performs slightly better with NVIDIA cards, compared to the other distros, of course. Although, and correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't really support Flatpak installations and doesn't bring any driver manager. You do have the CachyOS Hello menu that allows you to easily update your drivers or system or whatever, or even install the gaming packages including Steam, Heroic Launcher and some others. It also allows you to install some software, but in my opinion it is just kind of limited and not much user-friendly. And speaking of user-friendly, the most user-friendly distro, I'm kind of stuttering, the most user-friendly distro that I tested was Bazzite, being almost idiot-proof. Bazzite is a Fedora-based build, mostly focused on gaming as well, and it brings lots of things pre-installed like Steam, Heroic Launcher, Lutris, Proton Plus, where you can easily download the Proton version you liked or needed the most, and even has the best app store of the three, called Bazaar, where you can find almost any software you need. From office, productivity, streaming, you have it all there, and you can install those apps with a simple click. As for Nobara, it also features the Bazaar store, as it is also Fedora based, but well, it isn't as well organized as in Bazzite. Maybe Bazaar in Bazzite has some kind of customization. Nobara does bring the Flatpak store pre-installed, and you can later install Bazaar through it. It also brings Steam, Lutris and Proton Plus pre-installed as well. Now, I believe that Nobara is the version that you guys should look for if you are trying to go into Linux, because unlike Bazzite and CachyOS, it features the Nobara Driver Manager. And the Nobara Driver Manager, as the name states, allows you to easily install or uninstall any driver you want. And this is especially good for newbies changing GPUs, for example. In Nobara, you simply uninstall your AMD drivers, an example, change GPU, install the NVIDIA drivers, and you're golden. With Bazzite, I needed to go to their website, and when you change the GPU brand, you need to run a command in the command line in order to change the OS tree to NVIDIA, if you were using an AMD before, of course. And the command was easy, but as a Linux noob was really much harder to find that command. I searched many things online, and it was really hard. It was only when I went to their website that they had the command like there, in the download menu, and it worked. But again, it was not hard to make the command, but it was very hard to find it, for a Linux noob like I am. And with CachyOS, like any Linux distro, you can update drivers via command line as well, but I mean that takes even more efforts and more lines, meaning that it is even less user-friendly. I believe that you're just much better reinstalling CachyOS if you change your GPU brand. Again, if you're a noob like me. Basically, if you're not changing GPU brands, CachyOS would be the best solution performance-wise, especially if you're using an NVIDIA card. But in case you're a noob like me and you just want to dive into Linux in order to learn a bit more than you know right now, maybe, yeah, Nobara and Bazzite will be much easier, especially since you can install Flatpaks, which is basically the same way that you install things on Windows. You just go download the Flatpak instead of being an executable. You just download the Flatpak, install it, and you're good to go. So CachyOS is slightly faster if you're just using, of course, that same GPU all the time. But if you want to test one GPU, then another, and so on, changing brands and so on, yeah, I really advise you to go Nobara or Bazzite, just for ease of use. And just before finishing the video, I just want to tell you that in terms of compatibility, Linux is just getting better and better. I mean, Again, there are some games that you aren't able to play on Linux, but you aren't able to play those games on Linux, not because Linux can't play those games, it's because of the anti-cheat system. So if you try to play, for example, Fortnite, you won't really be able to, because again, anti-cheat. If you're trying to play Call of Duty, it won't really work because of the anti-cheat. The game works, but the anti-cheat actually doesn't, so the game won't even launch. If you're trying to play Battlefield 6, I don't really know if it will work or not. But if you try to play other games like, let's say, Helldivers 2, no problem at all. You can also play Marvel Rivals without an issue. You can play other games, let's say, like Path of Exile 2, Last Epoch also works, Titan Quest, and there are many other online games that also work on Linux. So it kind of depends on the anti-cheat system. Some will work, some won't, sadly. And that's because the programmers of the anti-cheat systems don't really program for Linux. That's the downside. Otherwise, all games would work on Linux. And well, people, that's all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget, hit like, subscribe, and share this video. Hope you enjoyed the video. Leave your comment in the comment section. Let me know if you're using Linux, if you're thinking about using Linux, if you want to try several games, if you want to try something new, and if you are one of those tech enthusiasts that like to test several things like I am, and like I do, you will definitely like to test CachyOS, Fedora, Bazzite, and so on, and Nobara, and so on. It is a nice experience, kind of outside of the box for people that are only used to Windows. But yeah, great experience. And by the way, let me know in the comment section if you want me to do a tutorial of how to install in dual boot, for example, Linux and Windows, because I think I can do that. Cheers.